Tyler Webb, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Excited about this one. Tyler, I ask all my guests, if someone's clicked on this and they have no idea who you are or what you do, why do you think they should stick around and listen to what you have to say?
I'm a sports business content creator that spent, the better part of the last 15 years creating content online. So that would take me back to when I was 14 years old. So I've seen a lot of iterations on the internet, what it means to make a living as a content creator on the internet. I've gone through a lot of different iterations myself, and I now run a social media marketing agency on top of being a content creator. So I'm thinking a lot about the creator economy and what it means to build really solid brands online from a lot of different perspectives. I just live in this world. I'm obsessed with it, and I think a lot about it.
15 years as a content creator. I mean, that's impressive. Take us back to the early days. Why get into content?
So, 15 years is probably slightly overstating it. Let's go closer to like 12 years. So when I was 14 years old, which would have put me at about a sophomore in high school, I had stumbled across this Twitter account called I Live for Football. And when I clicked over to the profile page, I realized that it was tagged in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is where I grew up. And so I became really obsessed with like how somebody from Green Bay, the place I grew up, had this account, which at the time probably had something like 10,000 followers, just reposting football highlights. And I needed to know everything about it. If you go back even further, I would often make my younger brothers, I'm the oldest of three boys, and a bunch of neighborhood kids come down into our basement and put on old Halloween costumes and act out different funny sketches in front of our family laptop webcam that would go back and like edit those sketches in Movie Maker and upload them to YouTube. So that was like the very first iteration of me creating content online. And thankfully those videos are deeply buried on the internet now. But I had this like proclivity to be on camera. My parents always share the story of they had this old VHS recorder, and I wanted to, as like a 3-year-old, see myself on the camera before I ever was recorded. Like I didn't have the patience to be recorded on camera and then wait to see myself. Like I wanted to see it all happen. There's probably some like weird ego thing wrapped up in that. But I always had this like, I don't know, knack to want to be on camera and I don't know, like make people laugh or just have fun, whatever it was. And so when I was 14 years old, I think that really came to a head when I realized that there was like somebody else from Green Bay, Wisconsin, which isn't a very big place, that was also doing that. So I remember reaching out. This kid who was also my age, by the name of Frank Kugel, was running the account. He went to a neighboring high school, and excuse me. And I remember we met for coffee at a Starbucks, and I just like asked him every question I could, and then at the end, I like pitched him. I'm like, I don't know how I can help, but I want to be involved in this. Like, it's so cool that you've grown an audience. He was like internet famous. I just knew I wanted to be a part of it. So without any skill, I didn't have any like experience again beyond those YouTube videos. I started posting football highlights with him on Twitter, and I ended up doing that all throughout high school, taking myself way too seriously. We all took ourselves way too seriously. And by the time I was at college in 2017, the account had something like 150,000 followers, and we were doing brand deals and nothing super significant, but it was like, it was like a real brand, or we treated it like a real brand. And from there, that launched me into doing freelance social media management, and obviously now content of my own. It was just like the springboard for me to take this hobby, is really what it was for me as a kid, like creating content online and professionalizing it and putting like this veneer of realness really to it, to something that I always just had done for fun as a kid.
I'm reminded when you're taking us through your story, there is, I guess ultimately where I'm going with this is just the importance of role models, and not just role models, but having people that have done it, that you can look up to, or people from a certain area that have done it and kind of paved the path. Like you talk about, the guy you met from Green Bay, you're like, oh, this guy is also from Green Bay and he was able to quote unquote make it, or at least, get somewhere with this whole content thing. And I think back to the story, I've brought it up probably a million times on this podcast by now, but Alex Hutchinson wrote a great book on the topic of endurance when it comes to obviously athletes. And one of the parts of the book that I'll never forget is he was talking about the Kentucky Derby, and how in the Kentucky Derby, if you look at like the winning times for the past 50 years, there's been slight improvement, but overall it's been pretty consistent in terms of the actual winning time. Now, I'm sure someone's going to go fact check this and be like, well, no, Nick, actually, there's, but I'm like, okay, listen, the general point is that the time is mostly unchanged, a little bit of improvement. And he compares that to humans. And he says how the reason humans always seem to get better and to push forward is because we see other humans break a certain barrier. And then we say, oh, wow, like that person did it. So can I. So, like the 4 minute mile is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Roger Bannister runs a sub 4 minute mile. And then within like 2 weeks, 15 other people run a sub 4 minute mile.
Right.
And so that's just the thought I have when I hear of your journey and of your story. Like when you see someone else do it, especially from an area that you're in that you can relate to, you're like, oh, if this guy can do it, then I can too.
Yeah. When you say that, I think a lot about the need for like external validation. I think I've always felt in this career,
Mm.
and especially back then. I mean, there was. I mean, there were YouTubers that I remember growing up watching that were like doing that for a living, but like being somebody who made money by creating content online was extremely novel in 2014. I still think it's something that a lot of people don't know a lot about, but in 2014 it was really novel. And so what that represented to me was a proof of concept that it was a viable path. I certainly wasn't brave enough to chart that course on my own, for fear of being mocked and ridiculed and judged by my friends and family. And so you're right, to have somebody that was showing me it was possible, made making that leap a lot less scary. And really, it's a lesson that I've carried through with me now, even in doing content full time now, like I have for the last 2 years. This idea of stacking proof and making things less scary for yourself by stacking proof. I think we really, especially in entrepreneurship, really like put on a pedestal this idea of like taking a leap of faith, like a blind leap of faith. And I think there are times where that is true and that happens for people. But I think in like the real story of entrepreneurship or content creation is stacking proof, that it to the point that it is almost irrational for you not to step over into doing something else. And that's certainly been my experience.
I almost feel like there is this side of entrepreneurship that gets portrayed on social media, and we'll get into it, but I think sports is similar in this manner. This side of entrepreneurship that gets portrayed is usually something that, listen, at the end of the day, we're all trying to get views and clicks. And so there's a certain spin to entrepreneurship that gets a lot of views on social media. And then there is like the realistic day-to-day, like how do I survive? How do I make money? Right? Like how do I pay my bills side of it? And so when you're talking about, the whole leap of faith and taking risks, like, I mean, I've told people like I still work a full-time job because I'm not making enough money off this podcast to go ahead and just quit my job and be able to pay my bills. And so when people ask me like, oh, why don't you just take the leap of faith, like go all in? I'm like, that seems kind of stupid. And also you're putting
Yeah.
a lot of pressure on yourself and you are opening up a door to do things the wrong way, because now without a steady income to pay your bills or to pay my bills in my specific scenario, maybe I'm going to go out and do stuff, just for the sake of making money. And maybe that's not the best content I can produce. That's not the best way to serve my audience and to serve people who listen to this podcast. So like, I do think it's like one of those classic things where it does well on social media. Like the message is like, oh, take the leap of faith. The penguin. I don't know if you've seen like the penguin videos on Instagram. The
Sure.
one penguin who like separated from the pack. Like, yes, that's motivational. That's great. I understand the point behind it, but there is a time and place to do it. And sometimes it's just not realistic. And it is not the best advice for you in that particular moment.
Yeah, it's very circumstantial. It's a lot like when you hear people's love stories, and they have this beautiful story about how maybe the guy was more into the girl when they first started meeting, and so the guy would write her a letter every single day to like profess his love to her. That's a really cute story if they end up getting married. If it doesn't work out, that guy's a stalker and probably has a temporary restraining order out against him. So you're playing the results really, and I think the same goes for entrepreneurship, as we were discussing.
Survivorship bias, right? I was just
Sure.
reading an article on this and listening to someone talk about this. It's a topic I've been thinking a lot about, and especially when it comes to entrepreneurship and content creation, is like you hear about all these success stories. Like I would consider you a success story. And so like I can sit here and I can ask you, hey, Tyler, take me exactly through what you did. Take me through your mindset. And sure, that is very beneficial. And I think would open up a lot of people's minds to what's possible. But you also like the caveat that I'll add to that is you have to take everything with a grain of salt, because for for all the Tyler Webbs in the world, there may have been hundreds of other people who also did things the right way and also had a similar mindset. Maybe they were off on one or two things, and that's what separated them from you. But like when you hear about these mindsets and this advice, like yes, there are also a lot of people who followed that and who didn't reach the level of success as someone who maybe you look up to. So that's the part of it. Cause like a lot of the mindset advice that you hear, that at least I hear on like Instagram and social media, is like at the end of the day, like it's all pretty similar. Like people find like interesting ways to spin it,
Yeah.
but a lot of the advice is like pretty basic. It's like, hey, focus on the thing that you want, work hard, and people will get fancy with it and they'll create these poems and all these things. Like the advice is pretty straightforward. And there's my point is that there's a lot of people who follow that advice and who still do not make it. And so, that's one thing I have to keep reminding myself is like, you can do all the right things and you can still not reach whatever summit you're after.
I completely agree.
But like, how do you, so like from your own perspective, because I'm sure you have other people that you look up to in within content creation, within sports, like how do you frame that for yourself? Like, do you ever remind yourself like, hey, there are people who have been more successful in content, let's say, than myself, but just um how do you kind of think about that issue and survivorship bias?
Well, I mean, content, it's not a zero sum game. And so while there will always be people that will be uh, better than me, um, I think especially given how young this industry is, I really do believe that a rising tide raises all ships. Um, it's a good reminder for myself because I'm not always like this. I won't sit here and be like I'm always cheering other people on. I certainly get jealous and envious of people that get opportunities that I want. But I come back to the thought that um, I should really be rooting them on because there are still a lot of skeptics when it comes to what I do for a living, specifically talking about like making short form vertical videos on the internet. That's still a use case to important stakeholders, be it advertisers or publishers, that isn't necessarily proven out yet to everybody. Um, like I always think about the example of nobody would ever bat an eye at why they'd have to spend this year it's something like $10 million on a 30-second Super Bowl commercial. But I'm still put in positions where I have to justify my cost, which is a fraction of that, to brands and advertisers because I might not be driving the most trackable clicks to my bio. So it's like there are still people that are skeptics of what I do. And I think in order for this industry to have longevity, for me to have longevity in this industry, I have to remind myself that I got to just cheer everybody on that gets the opportunities, even if I think I'm better suited for the opportunity, them doing well and having success in whatever it is they do. Even if they are better than me or they're not better than me, it'll be a good thing for me long term.
I had Max Brown on the podcast, and I think you recently did a newsletter article on him and
Yeah.
maybe even interviewed him.
Hmm.
Max was an awesome interview and awesome person, as I'm sure you well know. But one of the things that stood out to me when I interviewed him was him talking about this idea of a bust label and how people call him a bust and he didn't live up to his potential and all these things. And he reframed it as like one of the best things that ever happened to him because it taught him a lot of valuable lessons. And it reminded me of reading this book by Scott Adams called Reframe Your Brain. And Scott Adams recently passed away, but he was the mastermind behind the Dilbert comic, if people remember that, and grew
Yeah.
a presence on social media. Really smart mind. I highly encourage everyone to go check out his work. I think a lot of his videos are still on YouTube, and his book so far has been great. But the whole point of his book is like taking these frames of reference and reframing them into something that's positive. So like, for instance, in the Max Brown case, you could say, well, I'm a bust and that's just the mindset that you have versus, okay, maybe being a bust was the best thing that ever happened to me, or not living up to my potential was the best thing that ever happened to me because it taught me all these different things. I'm curious if there's like any failures that you've had that now looking back on it, you can reframe into something positive.
Yeah. So that Twitter account that I credit with sort of launching me into this career, um, it was banned from Twitter in 2017, 2018. Again, at the time it was 150,000 followers. Um, I think we had something close to like a team of 6 people working on it. I was spending a lot of my own time, and certainly a lot of my own self-worth was wrapped up into the performance of this account and, what it meant about me and like my skills and whatever. And we were just reposting football highlights, oftentimes with copyrighted sound. And at the time, Twitter worked on a 3 strike and you're out rule when it came to DMCA claims. And we had received our 3rd strike. So this account just in an instant disappeared. And all of this work that I had done over the last 4 years was gone in an instant without any recourse or like way to leverage ourselves out of it. Like it was gone. And I remember at the time, obviously being really disappointed about that. Really, really disappointed. But I came to realize that when I was looking at how much time I was spending on this account for little to no money. I mean, when I was saying we were doing brand deals, it was maybe a couple $100s a month. I think I liked more about what that account said about me and my skill as a creator online than I did like than what it was really worth. It was taking up so much of my time, returning really like very little. I obviously learned a lot, but returning very little, that it was just like starting to consume me in a way that I don't think was healthy. And I think it was like really limiting me. I think I was getting really scared. Stephen Bartlett talks about this as it pertains to creators. But when you get to a certain level of success, you start to not take risks because you want to protect the level of success that you have. And so for me, I think that meant I was getting really territorial over the success that I was having. And I wasn't willing to take the risks that were required to ever get past making a couple $100s a month on a Twitter account that was posting content that we certainly did not have the right to. And so when it got banned, it sucked. But in reality, that was the catalyst I needed to test my skills somewhere else. And like really, frankly, prove to myself that I had developed valuable enough skills running this account through high school in 4 years, and treat them in a way that, like, again, became what ended up now being my career. And so from running that account, I was introduced in Green Bay specifically to a couple entrepreneurs. Again, Green Bay not being a very big place. My dad, for instance, has worked at the same company for 30 years of his life. There's a lot of people in Green Bay that are like that. They're just like, it's sort of like an old guard of how it is to work at places. And so meeting somebody who was like an entrepreneur was really exciting to me. And he had me doing social media for his business, and he introduced me to somebody else, and I was doing social media for their business. And that Twitter account getting banned was really the catalyst I think I needed to say, like, okay, let's now double down on the thing that's working, which is freelance social media management. And it just snowballed into me learning more valuable skills and meeting more people. And I mean, if that Twitter account didn't get banned when I was 18 years old, who knows where I would end up? I just might not have had like the risk tolerance to take a leap. And so I suppose I'm glad it ended up that way.
How do you build up that risk tolerance?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier about stacking so much proof that it becomes irrational for you not to take the risk. And stacking the proof, it really, whatever you're trying to do, I think becomes less of a risk. So an example for me would be during COVID, I was entering my senior year of college. And all throughout college, I was doing freelance social media management, thanks in large part to having that Twitter account being banned and sort of being forced into it. And I was doing fine. I was probably making a couple $1,000 a month. But what I really wanted to do was get a job in social or in marketing, preferably at a company that I found interesting. And I was able to find one actually here locally in the Twin Cities called Prep Network. They're actually just purchased by a private equity firm run by Jason Kidd for something like $30 million. And I was going to be a social media intern for them the summer before my senior year. And the hope was that internship would go well, and then they would hire me when I was going to graduate in December of 2020. And so I had it all lined up, and the freelance thing was good. It was getting me through college, but this was going to be my job once I graduated. And then COVID hits, and over half of their business is running basketball events, and that part of their business obviously shut down. So that summer before my senior year, where I was supposed to be trialing for the job that I would have once I graduated, that opportunity went away. And I was forced that summer to call in every favor I had, to past freelance clients, to friends that I knew who were working at agencies, to current clients, to try to cobble together some semblance of a 40-hour work week, or some like equivalent in terms of how much money I was making. And I did, and I fortunately had a lot of relationships to call on, but I really pushed all my professional chips to the middle in that summer. And I needed it to work out because I didn't have a promise of a job once I graduated in December of 2020, as COVID was still, sort of at its peak. And that summer I ended up making more money than I thought I would. I ended up liking sort of the freelance lifestyle more than I thought I would. And without much of a job prospect beyond graduating December of 2020, I decided to go all in January 1st, 2021 as a freelance social media manager, which less than a year ago was not the course I had charted for myself. But I remember thinking in January 1st of 2021, it didn't feel like a huge leap because I had just spent the last, call it 8 to 9 months, building the proof that I needed, at least for myself and maybe even to like my parents and my friends and the people I was working with, that this was something that I could do, that was feasible for me. And so it wasn't like I was sitting here on December 31st, 2020, thinking like, okay, if this happens and this happens and this happens, like I could probably make this amount of money and be okay to pay my bills. It was like I had 8 months of data to back up this theory that, oh, I could make a living as a freelance social media manager. And really, I remember thinking like, I would be dumb not to do this. Like I have, and maybe part of it was I just had so many client obligations that would have been hard to unwind. But I remember thinking like, if I ever think I want to do something like this, work for myself, I would be dumb not to do it in this moment because I have all this momentum going for me. And that's where I say like, it would have been irrational to go to 12 different people I was working with and say, hey, actually, I'm not going to do this anymore. Like that would have been the irrational thing to do because of how much proof I had stacked up over the last 8 to 9 months. So when I decided to work for myself upon graduating college, and a lot of people that I went to school with had jobs at big fancy companies, especially the ones that exist here in Minnesota, it didn't feel like a crazy thing to do because I had just spent the last 9 months of my life doing it. And in reality, it felt like the most sane thing to do.
When I think about your story, I think about this idea of taking action. And I know it sounds super simple, but Brian Armstrong, he's the CEO of Coinbase, had this tweet that I always come back to. And essentially he says, hey, when you're struggling to figure out what your path is, or struggling to find more information on what your next step may be, just take any sort of action. Literally just take a step forward, do something. And oftentimes through action, you will find the answer that you're looking for. And so I always come back to that when I'm struggling either with content, or maybe I'm running out of content ideas, or maybe I'm like, where do I want this podcast to go? A lot of times I'm just like, all right, let me record a podcast. Let me figure it out. Let me post an Instagram video. Let me just do something. I need to do something. Let me write down an idea, literally anything. And oftentimes what I find is like, I'll post, an Instagram video or a reel, or I'll post a podcast clip, and I'll be like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's the direction. I don't know if that's what I want my brand to be. And so that is like, that in itself is like this piece of information that I can carry forward and say, okay, well, now I want to go this different direction. And so like, when I think about your story and your journey, like even now, I'm sure when you're posting videos online and clips, like each video and each piece of content that you put out is sort of this piece of information or this data point that you can use that can then further either align yourself with your brand or maybe even push you in a different direction. Is that kind of how you view content?
Yeah, especially short form content, because I post a video a day. I have for 2 or 3 years, and they're all data points for the audience, for the algorithm, for advertisers, as to what kind of creator I am. And if you looked at a scatter plot, they would all be around the same part of the chart, dealing with sports and business and human interest stories. But I think you'd probably also notice a trend line. I'm going to get really ethereal here, but you notice a trend line towards like this North Star, which I consider like kind of like driving my brand to a place where people are coming to see me or watch my videos because they like inherently like the way I present information and how I like who I am as a person. I think that would be my true North Star. Because really when like I'm creating content, I'm competing with everybody that uploads a TikTok today. And unless I want to compete on things like speed, like being the fastest in the news, or something like editing, like having the most visually impressive video, I'm going to have to come up with a different differentiating factor in order to do this sustainably. And so my North Star has always been like, I would love somebody to open the app and think, I have to go to Tyler's page to see what story he's covered, because I've built such a rapport and relationship with him that whatever he talks about is something that I know I'm going to be interested in. And of course, I'm never going to hit 1,000% like that, but that's the direction I'm trying to move. And so, yeah, I mean, when I look at content, um, I just look at me putting data points down, hoping that when I take a bird's eye view, call it 30 days or a month or 3 years, that I see a scatter plot and a trend line that I'm proud of and that I want to move towards. I certainly don't do a good job at that, because I really do get caught up. Like, we have a daily scorecard as creators in terms of what we think our worth is to the platform or to our audience or to advertisers. I mean, I'm still really beholden to like the performance of my last videos, how I feel about how my career is going. But I have to remind myself that really what we're doing is we're charting a lot of individual data points, and we can only hope that directionally we're going in the right direction.
How do you balance, and this isn't specific to creators at all, I think we all struggle with it, the internal versus external validation,
Mm.
and how sometimes when the external validation takes over a little bit, I mean, you just alluded to it, kind of being held hostage to the performance of your last video a bit. Like, how, like, do you have a talk with yourself and you're like, Tyler, all right, let's get back to the fact, you should be happy that you uploaded today, you gave it your best shot. Like, how does that dialogue look like in your head?
This is a real work in progress for me. So I'm going to give you the best version of it, and then I'll qualify it all by saying this is not how it is really on a day-to-day basis. So I consider what I'm doing now is like playing with house money. When I look back at the 3 years of me doing this, I've had so many cool experiences. And I'll be honest with you, Nick, this is a thought I had a lot around, especially when like TikTok was at risk of being banned about a year ago. That was a real, I think, wake up call for a lot of creators as to just how just how much rented land we're really building all of these careers on. And so I remember thinking like, okay, if this all went away tomorrow, um, I would have had so many cool experiences that couldn't be taken away from me. Sure, my followers could be taken away. My access to my followers could be taken away. The catalog of videos that I've made could be taken away. All these metrics could be taken away. My earning potential, but the ability to go to incredible sporting events and meet incredible people, like those were relationships and experiences that uh, could not be taken away. And I remember thinking like, wow, how lucky would I be if I got to spend the first part of my 20s doing that and making a living doing that? Like, that would be incredible. And then the second part of that thought process is, and I would be okay too, because the skills that I'm developing are valuable regardless of what platform I'm posting on or how much money platforms are paying me. I really do believe that the skills I'm developing as a content creator are only going to become more in demand as I see these platforms shift towards recommendation based algorithms, and short form content has now just taken over the way people consume content on these short form platforms. And that's a skill that I've honed and become really, really good at. Like, undoubtedly, I'm in the top 1% of short form content creators. And I think that skill is only going to be more in demand as we go forward. So it's a two-part thought process, which is, if it all went away, how lucky am I that this is how I got to spend the first part of my professional life? And I'll also be okay, because what better education could I have gotten than doing this professionally for as long as I have? I'll land on my feet somewhere. And so that's the existential conversation I have with myself. But I think, to the question you asked before this one about um, directionally where I want to be as a creator, I think it's also important to remember that, like, when I don't assume that this is all going to go away tomorrow, because I don't think you can operate from such a scarcity mindset as a creator. I really think like having a perspective of abundance is really helpful. It goes back to what I was saying about how I try to remind myself to root for people in this industry, because I do believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. If you have a scarcity mindset, I think it becomes really hard to do this sustainably. I think you have to as much as you can, force yourself to look at your body of work on a 1 month, 12 month, 36-month rolling basis and take stock of your directionality at those higher up views. Because if you're just going day to day, like I described, treating your last post like a scorecard and a true measure of your worth, it's just going to be a roller coaster that you're not going to be able to stomach for very long.
It's funny because I still have a friend who recently started creating content, and she's been posting on TikTok and she's been killing it. And she asked me, not that many content guru, but she knew that I was in the space, and she had asked me what's a piece of advice I'd give to her. And I'd say, just ignore your views for like the first, couple months. Don't even look at your views. I know it sounds a little, hypocritical based off the conversation that we literally just had, where every piece of content is a data point. But I said, when you first start out, you're going to have, it's like Hermosi's, I don't know if you've seen his, like entrepreneurship curve that he has. It got reposted on X a lot.
Okay.
I'm actually gonna pull it up here because I don't want to get it wrong. And it was like super, I don't know, super beneficial to me. Here we go, real time. This is what we do on this podcast. So he basically says, like, anytime you start something new, you start off in this uninformed optimism stage. So you're starting to create content and you don't know much about the space, but you're super optimistic. You're like, this is gonna go great. I'm gonna get 1 million views overnight. This is gonna be all fantastic. And then you start chugging along and you hit this stage of informed pessimism. Well, now you're starting to understand that, like, oh wow, content is difficult. It's difficult to get views. I need to have a hook. I need to have this. I need to have that. So now you get a little pessimistic. And now you're like, well, I don't know. And then you hit like this crisis of meaning stage, which is the third stage in this cycle. And you're like, okay, why am I actually doing this? Like, you start to think a little more deeply about what your purpose is, what value you want to provide to your audience, et cetera, et cetera. You start asking yourself some of these deeper questions. And then you basically have two options after that. You either crash and burn, which unfortunately is where a lot of entrepreneurs and content creators end up, or you hit the upwards trajectory of that cycle, which is informed optimism. Now you're like, oh, I understand all the ways in which I can improve. I understand how this works. Let me go at this again. And now you're optimistic because you're like, okay, I think I figured it out a little bit. You never truly figure everything out, but you're like, I have a good idea of where I want to go. Going back to your point about directionality and where you want your brand to go and all those things. And then the last stage is achievement, where you're like, okay, I've reached some summit. I've reached some level of success. The reason I bring this up, and the reason I bring up my friend, is because when you're first starting out, you have all this motivation, you have all this optimism. And my theory is you need to keep that going for as long as you can, because eventually you're going to hit a wall. And eventually you're going to hit this point where you're like, okay, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to give up. And so if you can try and prolong that for as long as you can, especially in the beginning, I think that's going to be more beneficial. And I think you're going to learn a lot more because you're going to stick at it for a longer period of time. So I told my friend in the beginning, just focus on your internal scorecard. Did I upload today? Did I give it my best effort? Am I aligning myself with where I think I want my brand to go, et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't know, man, this entrepreneurship is difficult. Content is difficult. Anything that you can do, in my opinion, to try and, ease that burden and that difficulty at least a little bit, I think in the long run is going to help you. And I'll end it on this. I'll end my rant here. I do think, going back to like the whole social media depiction of entrepreneurship, there is like almost this like virtue signaling that happens where, unless you are struggling and unless something is very difficult, then it's almost like you don't deserve the success, or you're not going to find the success. So Alex Hormozi, again, bring him up again. I love the guy, but he does preach this form of entrepreneurship that is inherently very difficult, that is constantly a struggle, that you're constantly at war. And some of those things are true. But I think there's also a flip side where maybe it's easier than you expect. And the example I'll bring up is I had Derek Sivers on my pod as well, and he sold a company for $22 million. And I asked him, I was like, how did that feel? Like, was it difficult? And obviously expecting him to be like, oh, it was the most difficult thing I've ever done. Like, sleepless nights, so yada, yada. And he's like, no, that was pretty easy. Like, I kind of just found product market fit and I was able to scale super quickly. We had a couple problems here and there, but, nothing too stressful. And I sold it for 22 million. I was like, oh, Nice. I was like, cool. So I just bring up that example to say it doesn't always need to be this like super difficult grind 24/7, lose all your hair. I'm already bald, so I've already passed that stage.
Sure.
But it's I don't think you need to make it super difficult. You at least don't need to make it more difficult on yourself.
I completely agree. There are enough external factors that will try to drag you down. I don't think you have to contrive difficult circumstances to make it any harder.
Right. Where do you think you're at in this stage, this entrepreneurship cycle? So to recap real quick, stage 1, uninformed optimism. Then you get to stage 2, which is informed pessimism. Then you get to stage 3, crisis of meaning. Then stage 4, crash and burn. I don't think you're there. And then stage 5, informed optimism. And then achievement would be stage 6.
Yeah, I'd be curious if Hermosi ever truly thinks he realizes an achievement stage. I just feel like it's not in a lot of people's DNA to like put an endpoint on something. But I would put myself in the informed optimism category. I think as I mentioned, I know I feel confident about the direction the industry is headed. I feel confident about my place in it, increasingly confident of my place in it. I feel like I have a better grasp than ever about the business of this, what I want to get out of it. Yeah, I mean, the idea of like saying that I've achieved anything I struggle with, I think it's a good thing to look back at and say like, oh, like 10 years ago, I would have thought I've achieved the world. But as you well know, when you're in it, it's, you're always chasing the next thing.
It's interesting. I had recently Luke McCown on the pod, and Luke has been one of my favorite interviews thus far. But we were talking about this idea of the journey and how you alluded to it briefly. But there is really no achievement. It's not like you beat this game of life. You don't beat the game of content creation, right? Like there's not some like final boss where you're like,
No.
okay, now I'm good. I beat content. Like I'm I'm the king. But he brought up a really interesting example, and this is perfect because the Super Bowl is on Sunday. Talking about when the Saints won the Super Bowl back in 2010, when he was the backup for Breeze. And he was saying, it's the funniest thing, man, because like people see the Super Bowl as like this pinnacle, like the absolute summit of success. Like it's what everyone in the NFL chases after. And he's like, it was such a weird feeling because like you win the game, you have all this confetti, you have the trophy, you have the media afterwards, you go celebrate with your family. And then maybe like a couple hours after all that's done, maybe you're at home chilling on the couch and you're just like damn, like, we did it. Like, and that's kind of it. Like we won.
Yeah.
And he was saying in that moment, you're not remembering the trophy presentation. You're not remembering what the media asked you. You're not even really remembering celebrating with your family. What you remember in that moment is week 12 when you beat the Green Bay Packers. Sorry, I used the example, but when you beat the Green Bay Packers and Drew Brees threw an awesome touchdown. You guys came back or like week 5 when you beat, my 49ers. So it's like, you think about all these like steps within the journey that ultimately led you to that destination. I was like, damn, like I never thought about like how fleeting that success can feel, even at the level of a Super Bowl.
Yeah. I'm sure he would even say that the resilience is part of the success and the longevity is part of the success. I mean, you hear this all the time from former athletes. The part they miss the most about playing isn't practice. It's not suiting up for games necessarily. It's being around friends and peers and getting to, in that instance, play a game that they love and having that be their job. And there is success in just being able to do that for as long as possible. And then ideally leaving it on your own terms and feeling good about where you left it. And I don't think content creation is so dissimilar. I think a part of the success of this is being able to do it for a long time and do it on your own terms. And the longer I've been here, the more I've realized like there is always going to be a next brand deal or opportunity to work with a company that they're cool. Don't get me wrong. And there's certainly things I view as checkpoints, like checkpoints that I would have been ecstatic about. Have you talked to me about it 10 years ago? But you're totally right. Once you've achieved them, you're not sitting there dwelling on how awesome it is 3 weeks later. You're thinking about the things you didn't get the opportunity to do, where you're looking around and being jealous of the people that are getting the things you don't get to do. And so really the longer I think about it, it's how long can I do this sustainably in a way that I feel good about it? And when do I have to leave on my own terms? Because that's going to happen. I'm not going to be making TikToks forever. And so I think sticking the landing is probably going to be an important part of this as well.
I want to get your thoughts on this. I was just thinking about it. I think so. Like when you go to school and college, even you have a class and you take a test, and your success is defined by the grade that you get on that test, and ultimately the grade that you get in that class. And that whether or not you deem that to be a success depends on your own expectations. Like, I was expecting to get a B in this class, maybe I got a B plus, great, I succeeded. Or maybe your expectation is just like, I want to pass this class and move on, great, you got a C minus or C whatever, and now you're on to the next one. And then ultimately all results in this final celebration where you graduate, you get your diploma, and then you move on. What I'm saying is, like, there are very defined endpoints at every point throughout school, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, college. There's a very defined, there's a clear definition of what success is. The problem is, in life, there is no real clear definition. Like, there is, we were just laughing about content. Like, there's no clear definition of like, oh, I succeeded in content. Maybe your definition is, hey, I got my first brand deal, or I'm able to sustain myself and pay my bills while creating content. So, like, there's no one catch all definition. It's just dependent on everyone's own expectations and their own definitions. So I wonder too, if like people, I know for myself, I'll speak for myself. Like, I used to struggle with that, where I was expecting, like the right answer on the test. Like, there's only one right answer. Like, there may be different ways to get to it, but ultimately the answer is either B or it's C or it's D or it's A, right? Like, you got to pick one. So I don't know, man. Maybe it's just like the fact that there is no clear definition, and all you really have is the journey. And maybe you have these like checkpoints along the way that you alluded to that you kind of hit. Well, I mean, ultimately, are you enjoying it or are you not? And I think that's the question that people need to answer.
I totally steal this quote from Casey Neistat, but he describes the paradox in which you're talking about, which is like when you do something creative or you work for yourself, you long for the more traditional markers of progress, right? And those are important, I think, both for internal validation and also external validation. Like, play me my tiny violin, but it's hard to go to family holidays and try to like convey to people the success I'm having, that I feel like I'm having professionally, because it's not like I've gotten a promotion or I've gotten a raise or I've gotten some employee of the month award. Like the way that I measure success as a content creator is much different than people who work in other fields. And I recognize that. And so what Casey Neistat said about this career, which I really like, is, am I doing more of the things today that I like to do and fewer of the things that I don't like to do? And that's how he's described himself measuring success in his career. And that extends beyond the work that you're doing. I think intentionally it bleeds into the personal. And so for him, I imagine that isn't, spending time with his kids and spending time like doing the filmmaking work that he likes to do, and maybe less time taking meetings and answering emails. And for me, it's like, it's been a really conscious effort, especially in the last 12 months, to really set aside time every day to do the thing that I enjoy about this career, which is writing and researching and like just kind of like thinking about the topics that I'm going to be covering, and intentionally offloading the more mundane aspects that I don't like to do, like invoicing and, posting a TikTok that I had posted the day before onto Instagram. Like, those are things that I'm not adding much value to, that I could easily hire for. But it also bleeds into my personal life. Like, I don't want to be working on the weekends, and I don't want to have to travel 20 days out of the month. And so I'm intentionally designing this career so I don't have to do those things. And when I look back at the last 12 months, I'm happy with how I progressed, because I can say confidently that I'm doing more of the things I want to today and less of the things that I don't want to be doing than I was 12 months ago. And I think that's sort of the best barometer that I've found, especially in this career.
That quote from Casey reminds me of a quote from Naval that I'll add to this conversation. And he says, the surest form of intelligence is if you get what you want out of life.
Mm.
And I think that sums up kind of your point, which is at the end of the day, you need to figure out like what type of life do you want. And there's some people who do want to do the 20 days a month traveling, and they do want to work weekends, and they want all these things that maybe you don't want. And so that's why I listen, at the end of the day, I just think it's important for people to sit down and ask yourself, what do I want? What attracts me? And I've said it before on this podcast. I think a lot of people want the money and maybe they want the fame, but they're too scared to admit to others that that's something that they're after, because they're viewed as these like taboo things. Like, oh, if I say I'm doing this for money, then people are going to judge me. They're going to say like all these things. And to an extent, right? Like if you're only doing it for money, I mean, you're probably not going to survive very long, A, but B, like I also don't think it's this like terrible thing that you need to like shy away from. Like, yeah, maybe part of the reason why you're doing all this is because you want to make more money than, maybe your current job, or maybe you see more opportunity with content or some of these things, or maybe it's a platform that if you build enough followers, you can build your own business off of and launch something and do right. Like there's many different avenues to it, as you well know, but I don't think it's this like super taboo thing that people should shy away from. Like you need to be honest with yourself. Like you need to really lean into what motivates you. And I think it goes back to like the whole conversation of this stuff is difficult. Like it is a journey. It is partly a grind. And if you're not being honest with yourself, then I think you're just gonna flame out and you're gonna do things for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I think
My
you
hot
need
take
to.
of the day.
Sure. I also think you need to take those things to a logical extreme. I don't disagree that there are plenty of people that are doing this just for money or just for fame. And I don't think they're that's their prerogative to do those things. But I then think if you're somebody who says, I want to do this for money or do this for fame, you can't be upset when there are secondary effects to that. So I'll give you an example. So like I see plenty of people, or I know plenty of people, not plenty, I know a handful of people that it seems like they're really just doing it for money or they're really just doing it for fame, right? And so they get really, let's say they get really catty about somebody covering a topic that they had also covered recently. And they get really like defensive over that. I think that defensiveness does not breed great collaboration. And it certainly doesn't allow you to like get to know people in this industry. And that's fine. If you're not in it to like get to know other people and like get to creatively collaborate with other people, that's fine. But you can't then be upset when you don't get those opportunities to creatively collaborate with other people because you spent so much time being obsessed about like protecting your own viewership for the sake of money and fame. And so, I mean, that's hard to like chart over the course of a couple days or a couple weeks. And I think we can all justify these one-off decisions to say like, yeah, I want to be, I want to collaborate with people creatively, but in this instance, so I just think like, yes, you are right that doing it for money and fame is fine. Plenty of people that do that. I just think people should be aware of like the second order effects that are maybe unintended, but certainly do come up. And as somebody who has now done this for 3 years and has certainly gone through like every iteration of that, I think the parts of this that become most fulfilling are not the money and the fame. And so, yeah, taboo or not taboo to say, but I think the people that get into it for those reasons are just not going to derive the same fulfillment as I have. And that's fine.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point too. By the way, your point about, essentially your actions have consequences or your motivations have consequences. Totally agree. I think that's a fantastic point. And then secondly, the other thing that I was thinking of while you were talking is the ability to stay fluid, right? And what I mean by that is maybe you go into this thing thinking I'm going to make all this money, and then you quickly realize like, oh, it's actually very difficult to do that. And then maybe your motivation changes. Maybe along the way you find fulfillment, like you were saying, from collaborating with others, from actually delivering value to your audience, from helping somebody else on the internet. Um, I remember the first ever comment that I got in one of my videos where someone was like, wow, I really needed this. Like, thank you so much. Like this helped me through a rough patch. And I was like, wow, like that, like selfishly, like that is very fulfilling to me. Like that made me feel so awesome. And so I do think like you go through, like it's important to stay kind of fluid with these things and understand like your motivations may change. And I think that's kind of my main point, at least as well, is like you may go into it with a certain set of expectations, and those expectations may differ as you move along. Tyler, I did want to get to some sports stuff here because obviously you cover sports, as we talked about.
Sure.
I'm curious, Packers fan. You grew up in
Yeah,
Green Bay.
sure did.
I have a friend who's also a Packers fan who grew up in Wisconsin. I don't think he grew up specifically in Green Bay. Is the Packers advantage the fact that that there is nothing to do in Green Bay and it's a super boring, terrible, miserable city. And so the players who play for the Packers have nothing else to do but to play football.
I think that is a result of a result of maybe like a more real advantage.
I hope you could tell I was joking, by the way, about the whole Green Bay being a terrible
well,
city.
I mean, it's not the first time I've heard that. And if you've ever been to Green Bay, you'll know that if you're specifically a black guy that's above 6 feet tall, you are going to stick out like a sore thumb. So whether or not there is anything to do there, you're going to be noticed when you do it, especially in Green Bay. But like one thing I don't think people fully realize or maybe internalize about Green Bay is that I always love to share the story. So I grew up Catholic. I went to church every Sunday with my family, and our priest was a season ticket holder to the Green Bay Packers, and so we would have a 10 a.m. mass that most people who have gone to religious service, Catholic especially, know that mass usually lasts about 60 minutes, which would make mass go until about 11, and games usually start at noon. Well, given the fact that our priest was a season ticket holder, that meant that mass on Packer home games had to be 45 minutes or less. I've never seen a guy say a homily so quickly or do the shortest version of every prayer that there was, because he needed to get out of there in enough time to get down to the stadium so that he could get to the game. And so when you really think about what that meant to me as a child, especially, which was like, I grew up in this world where like, religion, God, like that is put on the ultimate pedestal, but not so far behind are the Green Bay Packers, right? Like, maybe religion, God, 1A, the Packers are 1B. So like that is the kind of importance that is imbued, especially to like kids, and how important the Green Bay Packers are. And I think that is just the attitude that fans carry with them and the community carries with it. I mean, and probably give a lot of that credit to the fact that the community like feels financially invested in the team, as many of them are, buying these stock offerings, the 2 times that they've been offered in recent memory. And you can really just tell there's like a culture of like, this is really a community organized team. And I do think with that, Nick, comes a certain set of expectations from the community, as crazy as it sounds, that you're going to like carry yourself in a certain way. And I do think the organization does a good job of like setting those standards. Now we're talking about like organizational management, but I think a lot of that, unlike in other professional organizations where you see a lot of the dysfunction or success stem from the top down, I really think in Green Bay it kind of diffuses from the bottom up. And I think that's a really unique and not often discussed part of what it means to be a Green Bay Packer. And then I think the way you see that manifest is, of course, like there is nowhere to go. And if there is somewhere to go, you're going to get recognized. And I think as a player, you probably like really feel more so than in any other place, like the passion and the care and the obligation to your fan base. I just think usually in most cities, there's probably more of a layer between the players and their fans. And in Green Bay, I think it's been intentionally designed for there to be almost no distance between the players and the fans. And I imagine that makes players feel some type of way.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. I'm just going to gloss over the fact that the 49ers own the Packers in the playoffs. I'm a 49ers fan. We don't have to get into the details of that. I just wanted to
please don't
kind of say that out loud, as a 49ers fan, how like people change the Wikipedia page when a certain team wins and it's like, oh, this player's the owner of like whatever.
Yeah.
Like they should change the Packers Wikipedia page to be like the 49ers own the Green Bay Packers. Like we are. It's funny because I'm actually a minority owner of the Packers as well. I bought one of the, like when they had given out the stock offerings or whatever. So
you literally own the Packers.
I'm a minority owner of the Green Bay Packers.
There you go.
So, anyways, I did want to get to a more serious topic. How do you describe the culture of Packers quarterbacks? And what I mean by that is, in a business where every team struggles to find their franchise quarterback, the Packers have now hit on 3 straight in a row. Yeah. I don't think I'm breaking any news by saying I think Jordan Love is a franchise quarterback. How do you explain that? And how does that tie into everything you just said about Green Bay culture and the relationship between the fans and the team?
Well, I'll relate it first back to my own career. I think when you are trying to create success from a position of desperation that often leads you to do really irrational things. And I think most franchises, or the ones that you think about when you think of like prime dysfunction, are in a constant state of desperation. And I actually don't think it's too dissimilar from content creation, where there's like this snowballing effect where the desperation only gets worse. And then you're only apt to do more desperate things as a result of trying to reverse this like often decades long spiral.
I love
Um,
this.
and so, like when I look at content creators that are in this like rut of viewership, like you think about like people that have done the most asinine things on the internet to gain relevancy. And that's only because they're operating from a place of desperation. And so I think what the Packers have avoided is acting from a place of desperation. And so the one common thread that I've been able to pull from each transition from Favre to Rodgers and then from Rodgers to Love is that when they picked that quarterback, they were not picking that quarterback from a place of desperation. I mean, you'll hear about it this year as the NFL draft comes up. Is Fernando Mendoza worthy of a number one overall pick? I was just listening to a podcast where Todd McShay was saying, well, if he was in that 20, whatever draft class that Caleb and Drake May and Jaden Daniels were all in, if he was in that draft class, he'd probably be the fourth quarterback taken. But since he's in this draft class, he's going to be the first quarterback taken. And so you think about like the value of a number one overall pick and the fact that the Raiders have to pick a quarterback, they're operating from a place of desperation. Whereas if they already had a quarterback, or they had, they could maybe wait a couple of years and like pick their spot. And that's clearly what the Packers have done. They've never acted from a place where they say, this year we have to draft a quarterback, and everybody knows we have to draft a quarterback because it's obvious. And so I think that gives you a lot of leverage as a franchise, not only with other teams, but with players. There's a phenomena that Colin Cowherd talks a lot about, which is around that 16th to 17th year of being a Green Bay Packer quarterback, you kind of get this itch that you want to leave. And a lot of that is probably for the reason we described, which is there is no anonymity in Green Bay. There is no distance between you and the fan base. And I can imagine that wears on you. I can imagine that weighs heavily on you. And you saw it with Rodgers. You saw it with Favre, that they want to leave at a certain point. And as are a lot of professional athletes, they can often dictate the terms in which they leave. But for the Green Bay Packers, who have never operated, not at least in my lifetime, from a place of desperation when it comes to the quarterback, the Packers are really the ones that can dictate their terms. And I think they have really nicely.
Two things. First and foremost, I love that comparison between the Packers' logic when it comes to drafting and developing quarterbacks and desperation and content creation. I just sent you an email with a link to an article that completely changed my perspective on content creation. It's called The Perils of Audience Capture. I promise we'll get back to sports in the NFL here shortly, but the article talks about the exact phenomena that you just described. And it is a case study on essentially, I don't know if you remember that creator on TikTok, Nick Focato or something like that. Like he was a super overweight guy who would famously film himself doing these like crazy eating video. Like he would be like laying down on the floor, just surrounded by mountains of food.
Yeah.
He essentially acted like a pig. Like I don't know how else to describe to people who have not seen the video or his videos. But what's funny is he started off doing just like normal food reviews and like normal, like, hey, I'm going to Arby's today, reviewing their new blah, blah, blah. And eventually he fell into the perils of audience capture because his audience was slowly but surely like, hey, you should, crank it up a notch, like do this. And then out of desperation, he was like, okay, sure. And it just eventually got to a point where he is now on the floor surrounded by 50 pounds of food, smearing himself with all these McDonald's burgers and like pizzas and all these things. And so it reminds me of that. And so I just love that analogy of like teams acting out of desperation versus, I guess, not desperation, having like a logical process for how they draft and develop quarterbacks.
It's been the model. It's been the model of success for the last, my entire lifetime and more.
I also think about the fact, like, I wonder how desperate the 49ers were to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo, given the fact that they traded 3 first-round picks for Trey Lance, who did not pan out. I just have to imagine that Kyle Shanahan was like, I need to get away from Garoppolo.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was an interesting example. I don't actually see that as like desperation. Like Jimmy Garoppolo is a very competent quarterback. They made the Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that's actually an example of a team picking their spot, which they did. They obviously really liked Trey Lance to trade all the picks to go up and get him. It didn't work out, obviously, but I don't think they were doing that from a desperate move. I think they were doing that as like we need to plus up the quarterback, uh, the quarterback position. I do think it is. We live in there's a very different timeline where they don't draft Brock Purdy and everybody there is fired because of the disaster that Trey Lance has become. But that's a different conversation.
I've literally said that Purdy pick saved at least John Lynch's job for sure. Like
Yes.
100%.
100%.
Kyle Shanahan, I think probably a little more difficult to get rid of him. There's always like whenever the 49ers underperform, like there's always the people like, oh, fire Shanahan, fire Shanahan. And then you have like all these ex-players and coaches coming out saying like, oh, you know, he's one of the best coaches in the league. He's an offensive mastermind. Like, and everyone who has ever played for him has been like, he's an amazing coach. But of course, fans know best, right? Because we just watch the product on TV and we're like, yeah, fire Shanahan. So that's always a fun conversation. Tyler, a couple more questions here to round this out. I think this will be interesting because you started in sports media, I'd argue, about 10 years ago. And sports media in that time has changed tremendously. And so I'm curious if you could recap just how do you think it's changed in the past 10 years? And then how do you think it's going to continue to develop and change over the next 10?
So I think in the last 10 years, you've seen the gatekeepers get wiped away. So whereas 10 years ago, if you wanted to attract an audience talking about sports, you would have had to grind your way through a bunch of really non-aspirational assignments in cities that nobody wants to live in. And then maybe one day you get a shot at a network like ESPN. And there were gatekeepers along the way that gave you permission to reach an audience and talk to an audience. And now we've passed this inflection point, frankly, but now we're in an era where there are no gatekeepers. And in fact, try to think of an analogy for it. You see a lot of creators that are now being like invited back in by the traditional gatekeepers to bring their audience into the traditional gatekeepers ecosystem. So you see creators like Katie Feeney working with ESPN. You see creators like Enjoy Basketball. I forget his name, working with NBC. Like they're creators now that
Will Compton and Taylor
Will
DeLong
Compton, sure,
on
Busting with the
ESPN.
Boys. Yeah, exactly. And so it's totally flipped. The leverage has totally flipped. We just got done talking about leverage. We now have more leverage as creators than networks because we can make things faster and cheaper, and generally that perform better because we're closer to the audience. Then you ask about like the next 10 years. I think it's going to be really hard to justify the budgets that we still see a lot of these big networks and production studios throwing at talent and throwing at content, because as content continues to become more democratized and we see more creators creating audience outside of the bubble of ESPN or any broadcast television show, it's going to be hard to justify spending millions and millions of dollars to acquire talent at ESPN when your direct competitors are doing it for a quarter of the price. Like I think about, I have a YouTube series right now where I'm following around people at their jobs in sports. And it's sort of like a play on dirty jobs, but for sports specifically. So the last one I did was I spent a day as a Zamboni driver. And so I like
really cool videos, by the way. I really enjoyed them. Yeah.
And so like I'm actually there like doing the work of an ice technician in this case. And I'm spending like a 12 or 10-hour game day, whatever it was, doing the work as an ice technician. And, it has close to 300,000 views in the first month after posting it. It's reaching a lot of people. And that video cost me less than $2,000 to make. And when you think about the equivalent on something like a Discovery Channel, like I don't know what Dirty Jobs was doing in its prime. It was probably doing at least that, if not more. But let's say it was doing around 300,000 views, on like when it was airing live. I guarantee you to make an episode of Dirty Jobs, it cost at least, 50 times, maybe 100 times the amount that it cost me to make that video, and they're reaching the same amount of viewership. So that's the calculation that these networks are going to have to make over the next 10 years, which is like, are we willing to justify this cost? And if not, which I'm going to bet that the answer is going to be no, then how do we bring creators into the fold to do this? I think then what their challenge is going to be is like, how do we properly incentivize creators to do this? Because trust me, I get pitched now a lot on like working with like big legacy media companies, and it's hard for me to rationalize like what is the appeal. Like, of course, there's like a external validation factor, an internal validation factor. Money is certainly a part of it, but really in terms of like who I'm reaching and the audience I want to reach, and kind of even how I monetize the content, like I think the there's still some appeal there, and I still do work with media companies. Don't get me wrong. But I think the appeal will only start to erode for these companies. Like the leverage they have over individual talent will only start to erode, and they might just have to get more creative with how they interact with creators. And we'll see how that plays out. I'm sure everybody will have their own calculus that they do, but I think the leverage is only going in the direction of the creator.
Well, also when you look at like the macro trends, just society in general, like I'll speak for myself. I can't remember the last time I like turned on ESPN. Maybe I was working from home a couple days, like in December, and I turn it on to see like what people were talking about, or maybe if there's like a big news story, I'll turn it on to see like live reactions. But I don't even remember the last time. Like I don't even I have YouTube TV. The only time I use YouTube TV is literally to watch a sports game. Like I that is the only time I turn it on. I don't think I'm alone in this at all. I just think it's a trend within society. Like you see it, it's been super popularized with like news stations. I feel like they have, for better or for worse, like that has been like the most vocal example where it's like, if you look at viewership across like CNN, Fox News, like all, pick your favorite news station, like it's all down across the board. And I just think it's a macro trend within society where people are just flocking to Instagram, to YouTube, to TikTok to get their content. And like I'll see clips on Instagram from First Take, but like again, like I said, I don't remember the last time I watched First Take live. Like I don't know. I would have to really kind of dig around the memory bank.
I mean, the best example, or I think the best bellwether of this is that YouTube, not even YouTube TV, YouTube, like the free app that everybody has access to, now commands more watch time on people's televisions than Netflix does. So when you think about the kind of content that's getting posted on YouTube, again, it's stuff like mine that costs less than $2,000 to make and is made by an individual creator with a small team of freelancers, versus Netflix, which is pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into licensing and original programming. Those are now directly competing with each other. And oh, by the way, YouTube is winning. And so if I were to project what happens in the next 10 years, I think it only goes in the way of YouTube. And by the way, like, how incredible is YouTube's business model, where Netflix has to actively shell out millions of dollars to bring on podcast most recently, right? Or shell out millions of dollars to produce original TV. Meanwhile, YouTube has millions of hours of content uploaded to it every day for free without any promise of those people making any amount of money. And if they do make any money, YouTube makes 50% of that money. And so if you're just betting on businesses and business models alone, I think, YouTube and all these other social platforms which operate under the same business model are probably the fair bet.
To add to that, like I remember when Bill Simmons and Part of My Take, when they first made announcements that they were moving their video podcast to Netflix, like I remember just scrolling through the comments and it was just like an endless feed of people being pissed off that now their video podcast is essentially behind a paywall.
Right.
And it was all these pissed off people saying, all right, I'm done watching Bill Simmons. I'm done watching Part of My Take. And at the end of the day, like I don't think that's true for everyone, obviously, but I do think that there's something to be said for the fact that the podcasting is free. Like you can just hop on YouTube, you can watch it, you don't have to pay anything. And even like podcasting as from the perspective of the host or the creator, like you're talking about something that's inexpensive, like podcasting. I mean, you could technically start it with close to nothing, like close to $0 invested. Now, if you want to upgrade your camera and your microphone and like all these things and be more professional, like, yeah, that's where you start shelling out a little bit of money. But even that, like you can run a very high quality podcast for probably less than, $200 a month, like super high quality. And so I don't know, like I love the fact that you brought up the point of how inexpensive content has become, which I think ultimately is great because now you're hearing different voices, you're seeing different personalities. It's opening up the floodgates to everyone. Like it's just more approachable versus before. To your point, I think about like Ryan Russillo's story that he's told a bunch where, he had to grind and he was on these like local radio networks for however long. And then he got his shot at ESPN, like the legacy model that you were referring to. And then eventually he worked his way up.
Exactly.
Tyler, I got one last question for you.
Sure.
You've covered a lot of sports stories. I'm sure you have one or two that stick out to you that you've directly made an Instagram reel or a YouTube video about. What is one or two sports stories that come to mind as some of your favorites?
The one I'm probably best, I'll say best known for. It was certainly my first like mega viral video was, gosh, 2.5 years ago now, around this time, probably 3 years ago, around NBA All-Star time. Wilson had just announced that they were prototyping this airless basketball. So it was a 3D printed ball that was being used by Kenyon Martin Jr. in the 2023 NBA dunk contest. And I remember, as I do with a lot of stories, like just kind of scrolling through social, and I remember maybe seeing an Instagram post about it, or maybe even an article on Front Office Sports about it. I remember thinking like, oh, that's interesting. Like maybe I'll make a video about that. And so I kind of filed it away as something that might be interesting to get to. And I remember it took me like 3 weeks to get back to that story. And I really dug into it. I'm like, what was this basketball? I don't know. Not a lot of people are watching the dunk contest. It was Kenyon Martin Jr. I don't even know if he's in the league anymore. So him using an airless basketball for whatever reason didn't make much of a splash at the time. It was kind of like oh, this is interesting, whatever. So by the time I got back to it 3 weeks later, I was like, I don't even know how well this is going to do. Like, this is basically a 3-week-old story at this point. But I dug into it, and credit to Wilson and a company called EOS, which was a company that actually 3D printed the ball. They had done a really nice job recording and documenting like the process of making it, and the people that were behind it, and the technology that went into the basketball. And so I had a lot of source material to work from, a lot of really good like B-roll to pull from, which really helped make the video kind of like visually interesting outside of the clip of the dunk contest. And I remember posting that video and going to bed that night and waking up, and it had like several million views in less than 12 hours. I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. And throughout the rest of the day, across Instagram and YouTube and TikTok, it just continues to run up and run up and run up. And to the point where it was getting ridiculous, like 10 million, 15 million views, like each instance across all these platforms. And then I had ESPN or Sports Center, one of those accounts, reach out to me, and they're like, hey, can we post this video? And so they posted it and, tagged me, obviously. And so like, it just reached, it broke contain. Like the video totally broke contain. It went beyond people that normally watch my videos, and like, it's on ESPN. So people are like texting me, and like people that don't normally watch my videos are seeing it. And that video like really, really blew up. And I still remember like today, like if I have somebody come up to me and like recognize me, like there's a good chance they say like, oh, you're the airless basketball guy. Like that still happens, just because not that I popularized it, but I think it was kind of like the original framing that made it popular. And, they ended up like selling it a year later. And it's now kind of like a well-known phenomenon, this airless basketball. But I'm pretty sure I was the first one to make a dedicated video on it like that. Now you Google it and there's a million people like testing the basketball and everything. But, I remember a couple months later, the US team like flew me down to Chicago where they were having a trade show, and I finally got to dribble it and like actually hold it in my hands and everything, and make another video about it. But that was the first time I really felt like a video broke contain to that extent. And then I, got to like go do something because of it, which is really, really cool. And then, the videos I'm most proud of are the ones that are like Trojan horses for things that have nothing to do with sports. And so, for example, earlier this year, I was going to a Minnesota Vikings game. I live in Minneapolis now. And like I'm an avid news consumer here locally. And so I remember like, reading about the light rail here, which is the, sort of the primary transit system in the Twin Cities. And a lot of people here locally have stuff to say about like the public transit and the just like how public transportation gets used as a whole. So I was like, oh, maybe there's like an interesting story here about how sports intersect with public transportation. And just pitching you that concept is not, I understand, not an appealing idea, but my way in was, outside the stadium filming before I go into the game. Like, this is the best designed stadium in the entire NFL, but not for the reason you might think. And so then I kind of like back into the story of how, after the Metrodome collapsed, they were thinking about moving the stadium out into the suburbs, but they decided to keep it in Minneapolis because of all this infrastructure that they were starting to build around that time, part of which is the light rail. And then there's really great data about like how often the light rail and public transit in general is used to get people to the stadium, because the Viking Stadium is a rare case in America where it's a stadium like really designed in the urban core of a city. Oftentimes these stadiums are designed out in the suburbs. You have to drive and pay to park and everything. And like Minneapolis, to their credit, really relies heavily on its public transportation system and like ease of access to the urban core to get people to the game. Like you look around US Bank Stadium and there's not a lot of surface parking. There's of course like parking ramps and stuff, but there's not a lot of surface parking, which is very different compared to a lot of other stadiums. And so I just kind of made a video about that fact and like how good urban planning can make the game day experience more enjoyable was sort of the general thrust. And that video does like, a combined several million views across all platforms, which is fun because the video isn't about like sports or like a sports hot take. It's about like things I nerd out about, like public transportation and urban planning and local politics. Like these are all things that I'm interested in, but don't have a general appeal. But I'm able to get creative in how I package it. And a lot of people watch it and have opinions about it. And I think when we speak to tie our whole conversation together about like the directionality of my content, I get really proud about like where that pushes my content, because it makes me feel less like a hot take monkey that has to continue to spin out sports videos, and like really empowers me to make the videos that I'm most interested, while using sports as a Trojan horse, so to speak.
I love that you brought up that example because I had so his Instagram tag is Nick Knows Ball, but he's been blowing up on Instagram. I think he's over 60K followers, and he started the account like 3 months ago. And I had him not too long ago on the podcast, and we were talking about authenticity because his videos. I mean, it was the first time I've seen someone like his Instagram reel would literally just be a picture of himself, and then he would have like a little paragraph that said, "Hey man, congrats on the promotion. Just know that if you worked every day since 1850, you still wouldn't match the career earnings of Ben Simmons," or like stuff like that. Like he would intentionally pick like NBA players that people would be pissed about. And like I said, he blew up, and I remember us talking about the value of authenticity and how he had started a different Instagram account and it wasn't working, and he was just like putting out content that wasn't really himself. And then he just leaned into like his own interests and like stuff that he thought was funny, and then he found his this niche of people who he calls them ball knowers, but this group of like really diehard NBA fans who like understand all these like little jabs and little like inside jokes. And so I'm reminded, like when I hear you talk about, stuff that you're interested in, local politics, sports, business, all these different things, and how that combines to form this video that, does pretty well. But the fact that you're more proud of the fact that you leaned into what was authentic to you, I think is super important. So I love that you bring up that point.
I think it's required in a world where information is only going to be more easy to access. I think the thing that will differentiate us all as creators is our perspective.
Right. Tyler, this has been an awesome podcast. I mean, I learned a lot about not only you, but just stuff that I'm able to take away and implement to my own content. And I loved hearing about your mindset and the way that you approach things and your love for the Green Bay Packers. And I have to imagine being a Packers fan in Minneapolis is not always the easiest thing, but you persevere. God, you're speaking of
Yeah.
that tiny violin. People need to feel bad for you.
Living behind enemy lines. Yeah. I certainly get no sympathy here. That's for sure.
Tyler, if there's one piece of advice for someone who's made it this far in this podcast and they're still around, if one piece of advice that they can take home, what would it be?
I'm thinking a lot about, I mentioned it here just at the end, perspective in my own content. I do think it's true. I think the one impact of artificial intelligence as it pertains to creators isn't going to be that creators are no longer going to exist. It's going to be a certain type of creator is no longer going to exist. And that is the person that you go to just for your information. I think information is going to become so readily accessible, so easy to digest. People are going to be able to now receive information in ways that they want to receive it. Just being hyper personalized, that you're going to have to, as a creator, find a different way to reach people. You just can't be a source of information anymore. I had Jack Appleby on my own podcast recently, and he mentions this, like, if you're a source of information, you're going to lose. And so the thing that you're going to have to differentiate on is perspective. And I've been thinking a lot about what that means for me, because I think when people hear perspective, their mind first goes to politics. Like, now you have to start leading like all of your content with what your political leanings are. And I don't think that's true. For some people, that is how they choose to differentiate. But I think your perspective can come through in the topics you choose to cover, how you choose to talk about them, the sources you choose to pull from, the type of people you choose to talk to. Like there are ways that you can imbue your perspective and your worldview onto content in a way that isn't like, here's who I voted for and here's why the other side's wrong. I think like there's that's just the opinion a lot of people have on quote unquote like perspective. But I think it's just going to be so important. To build that relationship with your audience is how you're going to build a moat around AI between you and other creators. And I would encourage a lot of people to look at the directionality of their own content, try to take a genuine look at, if you, one, like the direction it's headed, and two, how you can supercharge pushing yourself in that direction through providing perspective through the topics you're already talking about.
I love that. That's a great final message to close us out. Tyler, where can people find you and more of your work?
You can follow me everywhere at Tyler M. Webb. If you're interested more in the sort of the background of this creator career, I post a lot about that on LinkedIn specifically. And then that's where you'll be able to find a lot of conversations I have with other creators on my own podcast and in my newsletter. So find me on LinkedIn.
Love it. We'll put all those links in the description. Tyler, man, thanks so much for coming on. This was a blast.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.